Hi everybody, I'm Matthew. I'm the project lead for matrix.org, the open source project for secure decentralized communication. Thank you very much for coming to hear the talk today. I imagine that you probably know what Matrix is because the chances are that you're using it right now to watch this and to participate in FOSDEM 2021. And I'd like to thank everybody who has used Matrix to attend the conference. Hopefully by the time you listen to this, things will be going smoothly and on track. But in case you're not familiar with what Matrix is, I'll start off by explaining it and then explain some of the work that we've done in building out FOSDEM this year and some of the work that we're doing on the protocol and the reference implementations in order to make Matrix suitable for these sort of things and even better going forwards. So Matrix itself is a open standard protocol that defines an open network for secure, decentralized real-time communication. You can use it for instant messaging, interoperable chat. You can use it for VoIP signaling. You can do VR or AR over it, IoT, data fabric, or really any kind of real-time communication. The mission for Matrix is to be the missing communication layer for the open web. Somewhere where you can just go and publish data and subscribe to it as a real-time stream of information where it is replicated over the participating servers. If you know how Git works, you know how Matrix works, because all Matrix is applying the same architecture of Git, of replicating information across participating nodes, but applying it to real-time communication rather than source control. So our mission is to build Matrix out as literally a global decentralized comms network, one that can hopefully replace email, replace the phone network, and liberate communication to be controlled by the likes of us, rather than the giant silos and walled gardens of Facebook, Google, Slack, Discord, etc., who control it today. And that we have the vibrancy and heterogeneity and innovation that you get on the open web, rather than it being stifled by the silos who control it today. Part of this is that no single party can own your conversations in Matrix. That if I'm on matrix.org, I'm talking to somebody on a different server, then my conversation history gets replicated equally between them. So there is no single focal point. It's not as if there's a chat server somewhere which, if it goes down, the conversation will die forever, or somewhere where an attacker could go and compromise the whole conversation. Instead, everybody has their own chosen provider, which looks after their own messages and replicates with the other people in that conversation. Architecturally, it looks a little bit like this. You have the blue dots in the middle, which represent home servers. You have the lighter blue dots around the outside, which are bridges through to other protocols like Jabber, XMPP, or Slack as a different system. And the green dots here are native Matrix clients, things like Element, or Fluffy Chat, or Neko, or Beeper, or other clients on the Matrix network. And if, say, Alice here is talking to Bob here, then the conversations get replicated between this server and that server there, so there is literally no single point of failure or control. A new addition to the Gitter family, to the Matrix family, has been Gitter, who joined the Matrix network at the end of last year, not just with a Gitter bridge, which we'd already built back in 2015, but actually natively adding Matrix support into Gitter. So folks who are familiar with using Gitter for developer chat can now talk to anybody on the Matrix network and vice versa, which has been a big sort of milestone in terms of taking one of these circles, which we've flashed up so many years and so many different conference talks to show how different networks can link into Matrix, and actually got them to natively communicate on Matrix, which has been kind of fun. There's a great talk by Halfshot and Eric from Gitter who worked on this at the end of last year, which was on Saturday's session. Go check it out if you haven't seen it already. So in terms of where Matrix is today, we've got almost 28 million global Matrix IDs that we can see from the matrix.org server, the original server that we set up and running. And we see about 8 million messages a day now across around 4.5 million chat rooms. So I think that number might be a bit low. We see around 60,000 federated servers, or at least we estimate there are 60,000 based on the ones which we can see. Looking at the traffic on matrix.org, these days we do about 45 messages a second when America is awake, and then 4,500 messages a second on average going out. So each room is roughly 1 in, 100 out. 1,000 projects at least now on GitHub building on Matrix and elsewhere. Most of them are open source, but there are a whole bunch of proprietary ones coming on as well, for better or worse. Many companies now building on it, and they could be little consultancies through to tens of $billion multinationals. And very interestingly, we continue to see more and more governments coming on Matrix. So when I was last here in Brussels, if I were in Brussels, we were talking about France coming on board Matrix. But since then we had the German Bundeswehr, the armed forces, as well as money education deployments in Germany. And we also now have paid deployments with the UK government and the US government, which we'll hopefully be able to talk about in more detail later on. There's also 3 others who we can't really talk about even by name right now, but it's exciting times as we basically see genuine network effects and snowballing happening as Matrix becomes the de facto way for the public sector, at least, to communicate, and that kind of spills over into the private sector too. In terms of what the growth has looked like since apparently July 2017, which is when the Grafana stats begin, where we were down at a couple of million users, here you are now up at almost 30 million users as of February 2021. And it's been accelerating fairly steadily, other than a bit of a glitch in November or October of last year, which I think was somebody's big server taking a wobble or no longer reporting stats, and so the growth rate isn't quite as pronounced. So, that's Matrix. Apologies if you've heard that many times before. You're probably wondering, what has this got to do with the talk? What's this about virtual communities on Matrix? So I thought I would try to explain how we've gone and set up FOSDEM to use Matrix as the social and chat communication there. Now, I'm cheating a little bit because I'm recording this on the Saturday night of FOSDEM, because obviously I can't do a talk about running FOSDEM on Matrix without actually having a reference point of how it actually is working. At least that's my excuse. It's not just that I've been really busy and horribly late on recording my talk. So architecturally, what we have are basically 2 different types of rooms in Matrix. We have talk rooms, where the presenters of a talk, like this one, hang out. We can go and see mine in a minute, in a very meta way. And then you've got the dev room, where the audience is watching. And the way in which we've implemented these is with widgets, and basically the dev room has a live stream, widget being an embedded chunk of HTML, which displays HTTP live streaming from the normal FOSDEM video player infrastructure. And in practice, that's Voctomix and the FOSDEM CDN and the ability to record. And it's the stuff that gets used in ULB on a regular basis year by year to go and broadcast the live streams there, except normally that's from a camera. So we need to get a camera into this to see what's happening on stage and then relay it to the audience. And so the way we've done this is to use Jitsi, the excellent open source video conferencing platform, which goes and hosts the conference of the video conference. You then have Jitsi Meet, which is a web app, which is embedded in an iframe as a widget inside Element. And you can see, you can switch basically between a live stream being broadcast of that conference, of the talk, as well as the user can then join that conference to participate in it and be part of the Jitsi. So you've got Jitsi Meet talking via WebRTC and HTTP APIs over to the Jitsi video bridge. You've got a few other components there which make up Jitsi, like Jikafo, the Jitsi conference focus, and Prosody, the XMPP server that provides the signaling within Jitsi. And then you have Jibri, which is the thing that actually broadcasts these talks. Jibri is actually just a Chromium running in headless X with FFmpeg recording whatever is on its virtual screen. So it literally just connects like a normal web browser straight into the Jitsi and records it via FFmpeg and flings it via RTMP, the real-time media protocol, over to Nginx, which we host as Matrix, actually provided by Element, the company that hires the Matrix core team, and then flings that via RTMP over to FOSDEM. So it's kind of amusing that we're using HLS here for viewing the media, which is a hangover from Winamp. If you ever looked at an HLS playlist, it is literally a Winamp playlist. And you've got RTMP, which was created for Flash's real-time media streaming. And Flash is dead completely, and yet RTMP lives on as a perfectly reasonable video streaming protocol. So what happens is that the people doing the talk hang out here on Jitsi. They get broadcast through to the dev room at the end of the talk. The recorded talk gets played out on the FOSDEM infrastructure. And meanwhile, you obviously have Matrix using a Synapse hosted by Element Matrix Services running, which provides the actual coordination for people locally on the FOSDEM server, but also federates out to the rest of Matrix. And then finally, you have the conference bot itself, which sits there trying to orchestrate the conference, going and moving the talk rooms around, setting up the widgets, changing the permissions on the rooms, ushering people from A to B, and trying to make sure that everything runs on time. So that's what the network diagram is. Let me just Alt-Tab over to Chrome, and we can see the miscellaneous dev room, where you're probably sitting right now watching this. So here we are at 11 o'clock at night on the Saturday before the talk goes out tomorrow. And obviously there's been a bunch of talks going on there earlier today. You've got the live stream sitting here, which is busy ticking away, showing the placeholder content coming off the FOSDEM Voxer mix. But if we go, say, to the backstage room for my talk, building massive communities in Matrix, then at the moment there's not much happening in here because we haven't kicked off yet. I can say start broadcasting it right now. I'll go and start a Jitsi, and there I am, a Jitsi within a Jitsi within a Jibri within a Jitsi or something. And people, if they were tuning in, and if the bot had put this live in the dev room, you would be able to see me now. We also have this widget here, which is a scoreboard, so that if people were to upvote messages during my talk, they appear here, and I can click on them, and it will take me through to the right room. Now, this is kind of cool, because widgets here are basically iframes. It can be any HTML you like, complete with a video conferencing solution, but they also have superpowers, like the ability to deep link into bits of Matrix and basically extend the client a bit more. I'll talk about that in a minute. There's another special Easter egg that we have in here, that if you go and look in the right panel, and you do it in the right room, let me go back to the dev room. Where is the miscellaneous dev room? Here it is. Then you've got a widget here called Schedule. And if you click on that, interestingly, it asks you for permissions, because we take permissions really seriously for widgets, given that they are random third-party HTML content. In this instance, it's letting me use cookies, and it could display a privacy policy, etc. We go into this, and it's a really cute widget that has been set up by Hatto Nordek and Stefan from Nordek, some folks who we're working with in the German education sector. And this actually schedule goes and tells you the talks which are happening on the given day. In this instance, it's obviously talking about the talks for yesterday. So if you're wanting to keep track of the schedule in your given dev room, this is the way to do it. Right. So what else can I show you here? I think that's basically the main bits. And a fun thing that we did was to take this widget for the combination live stream in Jitsi. And it's available to anybody on the server. It's hooked up by default on chat.fosdem.org. So if I go to something like the Matrix stand, and of course there's nobody on the stand right now because it's 11 o'clock at night, then I could go and join that conference, and here I am going and broadcasting out to anybody on the stand, so it gives you a nice DIY stand. Can't believe I missed everybody. They knew that they were recording. Very sad. Anyway. Oh, and there I am. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so I think that gives you an idea of what's happening behind the scenes at FOSDEM. In terms of the Synapse itself, something people will probably be quite interested in is how we've scaled it up. And there's a blog post you can look for called massively how we fix Synapse's scaling, where we basically took it from being a monolithic server through to one which can cluster horizontally into as many worker processes as possible. So this is the final state that we have today inside the Synapse, that you have a main Synapse process that does relatively little because it's no longer on the critical path of anything. Instead, you've got sync workers which send events and messages to clients. You've got event creators which create events on behalf of clients. And then they go and actually persist the data using separate workers which write to the database. So you have clusters of things which can write to the database. And likewise, when talking to servers, you have federation senders and federation receivers which go and send messages out to other matrix servers and receive them from other matrix servers and then go and put them out to disk. So this allows us to scale really quite well. We can also split the database up into separate schemas if needed. And we use Redis as a pub/sub bus within Synapse in order to poke the various different workers and tell them when they need to get stuff off the database, or sometimes just get stuff off the Redis stream itself. Now, we had a bit of a wobble on Saturday morning briefly due to the FOSDEM server overloading, and what happened here was that we had all of this set up in precisely this configuration, with the exception of the dreaded others here, because there's a whole bunch of little helper workers for doing odd functions, and particularly communities traffic and read receipts, and a couple of other edge cases, encryption endpoints, which get offloaded to workers. And as it happened, we didn't expect to see as much traffic to merit having even those things split out. Unfortunately, we were wrong. It turned out that the community stuff took a lot more load on the mastered Synapse process than we were expecting, and so we had to beat a hasty retreat to shift it off onto worker processes. But the fact that we were able to do that, and now the master process is sitting at about 20% CPU and doesn't really scale upwards with the amount of traffic on the system, is a huge win relative to where we have been in years gone by. And people using the matrix.org server or the FOSDEM server or Mozilla server or other ones with thousands of users or tens of thousands of users should have noticed in the last 6 months that we have finally cracked the performance problems which have plagued Synapse in the past. So talking a bit more about widgets. Widgets are cool. They've kind of been underutilized over the years. We added them in 2017, and it was kind of a quick proof of concept, frankly, to try to help us raise money to fund Matrix work, to say to people, hey, look, we can embed apps into Matrix. This is the way of the future. So here we are 4 years later, having finally used them in anger for FOSDEM. And as I said, you can embed arbitrary iframes into chat rooms. You get a post message API, which is exposed for interacting with the host client. And nowadays, you get the really cool permissions model that allows you to provide capabilities to the widget. So you can have it send messages in the client on your behalf. It can read your chat rooms if you give it access, and only if you give it access. It can switch room, what I was talking about earlier with the scoreboard. It can even do a picture-in-picture thing. You can do sticker-style sort of free-form UI being added into the app. It can authenticate the user via OpenID. And nowadays, in the last few months, we've added modal widgets, so the ability to do custom dialog boxes within any Matrix client for sort of form-style capability. Very flexible layout, hence coming very shortly. You can resize them at last. Crazy is that? They can work out what theme the client is in, so you can have dark-themed widgets, etc. We also have a fun library that Travis, who is our widget god, has been working on called Matrix Widget API that allows you to turn any web app into a nice widget. And they're pretty cool. They're rapidly evolving at the moment, and the biggest problem by far is that they're not spec'd in the official spec. There are lots and lots of spec proposals, but none of them have merged, and then as a result, I think people are a bit unfairly scared of them, and they haven't been implemented outside development. So we're determined to fix this going forwards. Probably the quickest way to do this will be to take Matrix Widget API and provide a very lightweight widget harness that you can either embed into your existing Matrix client or just have on the web somewhere as a host for your widgets. So that, I don't know, if you're using Neko or some native client, you don't need to worry about embedding a web view controller or in it or anything, but you can just pop up a web browser showing the necessary content having authenticated it. Now, another big thing that we've done for FOSDEM is social login. So this stems from the massive focus on first-time user experience that we've been working on with Matrix and Element over the last year. And one of the big stumbling blocks we've seen are people just getting confused and bored doing registration and login. And so we wanted to give a one-click sign-up process for people who don't care that much about privacy and just want to jump onto an app. I'd be interested to know how many people use this to register for FOSDEM.org accounts. We need to look at the stats. Perhaps in the audience you can admit to whether you used social login to sign up this time. And a good experience actually is on iOS, where frankly you're already completely beholden to Apple, and this means that you can get a single click Face ID scan and boom, you're on Matrix without needing to do anything else at all. We tried to avoid people getting held ransom on Matrix by their identity provider by capturing their email so that they can always reset their password and continue even if Apple were to shut down their account. And it's certainly not to everybody's taste, but as a usability polish thing, we think it's a huge deal, and an enormous amount of work went into hooking it up with multiple OpenID Connect providers or OAuth2 providers in order to give the 5 options that we now can offer. And next week, I suspect we'll be turning it on for matrix.org too, in order to make it easier for people to sign up. As I said, not to everyone's taste, but could be really useful for people, and I hope that somebody appreciated it for FOSDEM. Another big thing that we want to talk about for virtual communities, which in an ideal world we would be showing off live today for FOSDEM, but we're not quite there yet, is Spaces, the final frontier of how you manage communities in Matrix. So the story of Spaces is as follows. Once upon a time there were communities. Now communities are the feature that you have in Matrix today, also called groups, which group together sets of users and rooms. Now, they have some fairly big problems, in fact, some massive problems, that when we added them, a bit like widgets as a mad rush in 2017, we kind of, I think it's fair to say we didn't think it through quite as thoroughly as we might have, or at least we didn't specify the requirements as well as we might have. And we created a whole new API service which overlaps an awful lot with the existing primitives that we have. So it does things like track memberships and track access controls. You invite and kick and ban users from these communities. You need to track key value metadata. And meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of features it doesn't have, which would be really useful. Like they don't propagate updates in real time. And groups, as they are today, are controlled by a single server. They're not decentralized. You don't have third-party invites. You can't invite people to a group by email. And there's no room directory support. Frankly, there's a whole bunch of bugs and complexity in the APIs, which we saw firsthand yesterday as they caused problems on the server in the morning before we farmed them off onto their own worker. The one thing that the original communities design did do right is, due to being centralized, they are good if you have a single centralized, single source of truth, like an LDAP directory that you want to expose into Matrix. Because say if you've got 300 million people in a nationwide LDAP directory, do you really want to create a Matrix room or something with 300 million people in it to express it? No, you just want to delegate through those membership requests to the back-end system. But in practice, nobody really does it. And frankly, there are other ways of working around that particular edge case. So what we decided to do is to burn it with fire. Introducing Spaces, Matrix Back Change 1772. So how Spaces work is, again, to group together your rooms and users, but we group them in a room. So you inherit all the intrinsic capability and goodness that you get in a Matrix room. You get power levels, access control, invites, membership. You can store any kind of room state in it as metadata. You get third-party invites. Get decentralized rooms. They're shared between servers. You can even bridge them into identity sources. So if you did have your big LDAP set of users, there probably are ways in future you could bridge that into the room in order to define the membership on the Matrix side. And so that's basically the whole thesis of Spaces. We throw away the entire groups and communities API and just use the one that we already have. It supports auto-joining, so if you join a space, you have the ability to join the rooms within it, and more interestingly, we support nested hierarchies of rooms in spaces. So spaces can have multiple children, so-called space child state events, and they can even have multiple parents. So you can have your canonical parent, and then you can have other places in the space tree where where this room or space should be found if you so desire. So, for instance, I could have a private collection of rooms where I favorite things, basically replacing the tagging functionality that we used to have exposed over Matrix. And I might have a public set of rooms, a community, which I publish for other people. And I might have a sort of semi-private space like my workplace, which is a kind of mix of curated rooms and ones which I want to share with my mates, but I don't want to share with the wider world. So Spaces supports all of these dialects, and basically without needing any additional APIs, for the simple case of it at least. You just use room state events to track who's a parent and who's a child. And you also have a lot of fun, because everything is better when prefixed with the word space. Space tree, space nav, space child, space parent, etc. So that's what spaces are, and I should show you what they look like. Let me go back to my browser. And here I have an element. Now this is a local element dev that I'm running here with on the Spaces branch, and I'm afraid it hasn't yet merged to develop, but it will very shortly. And this is logged into Dendrite. I'll explain why we're using Dendrite in a bit. And you can see on the left-hand side that we have some things that look a bit like the communities we have today. And indeed, if we compare them with the communities that you get on, say, normal element on chat.fosdem.org, this is what a community looks like today. I can go to View Community, and you get this great big list of rooms. Oops. And you've got a whole bunch of members in the community. But all you can do is to click on that, and it will filter down your room list to just look at the rooms which are officially part of the FOSDEM community. However, if I go back here, we have something similar-ish, but if I click on it, you will see, I hope, that it is a hierarchy of spaces. So FOSDEM 2021 is an actual space. I can go and view it. There's a space home here. It's actually called #FOSDEM 2021 on FOSDEM.org. Who'd have thunk it? And this is spread out into dev rooms, and it's spread out into stands, and it has a ton of different dev rooms in it, all 50 or so of them. And having gone and clicked on the top level of this, it's actually gone and given me a structured room directory in a hierarchy of all of the rooms in all of FOSDEM, which is pretty cool. You can see the number of members, you can see the avatars, the topics, etc. And it's also gone and filtered my room list down to all of the rooms which are actually part of this in FOSDEM. So I could drill down further. I could go and look at just the dev rooms, or I could go and say look at a particular dev room. Let's look at the real-time dev room. The order here is it's consistent, but it's random right now. Obviously, in fact, we do support fixed ordering, but I think the bot that created this used, say, random ordering to define that. And if I go and look at, say, the real-time communities room, I've got the dev room itself, and I've got the backstage room for the speakers, and I've got the Gitter talk that I mentioned yesterday in there. So you can see 356 people there, etc. So the really fun thing is that we can just go and jump around this, filtering it at different levels, looking at different rooms, and collapsing it down, looking at the stands instead. Let's go and see the Matrix stand. And there's people going and asking about, it's the same conversation from earlier, in fact. So that's how spaces work. Relatively simple, but actually really fun to play with. Now, if I go and create a space, I have a choice of doing a public or a private one. Let's create a public one, and let's call it public test space. Hello world. God, I can't type. And let's upload some, I don't know, let's chuck a FOSDEM logo into it. There's a great FOSDEM logo. Bling. And we've got much nicer UI around this now. We want to create some public test rooms, so let's have a general room and an off-topic room, and that's probably enough for now. And hey presto, there are the rooms. So you can immediately then go and share an invite to this, or you can invite some users to hang out with you in your new space. And having focused on this, you can see that here it says public test space. And if I clicked here, it will go and take me over to FOSDEM 2021. So this is feeling a lot more like switching between workspaces in Slack or Discord servers or something like that. What else can I do here? Let's finish building the space, and perhaps let's create, how should we do this? Yeah, let's create another space. We'll create a private space, and I'm going to call it Matthew's Secrets. And into Matthew's Secrets, I'm just going to keep it for me rather than me and my mates. And let's have secrets in here. And so I've just got a single room called Secrets in my space. So I can now switch back and forth between the public test space and my secret stuff. But what if one of the things I want to curate in my secrets is the public space? Can I go and add the public space into it? Well, weirdly enough, I can. I can hit the add existing rooms, and I can add like any of the FOSDEM rooms into this. I can go and add, any of the FOSDEM spaces. I could add my public space. I could add some rooms from FOSDEM too. But if I go and say put in the public test space into Matthew's Secrets, you can see that now I've got both general off-topic and secrets, or I can drill into it and just see the public test space stuff. So I've gone and nested the public test space inside my secret collection here too. So there you have it. It's pretty powerful and exciting in terms of being able to create arbitrary hierarchies of spaces like this. And you can see it building up here in the index. Right, so that's what Spaces is all about. And if we look at what comes next, first of all, it does need some spec changes, but they're all kind of very useful things for the spec. It needs peaking to work, and it needs peaking over federation to work. And you need to be able to efficiently pull out the space tree hierarchy when you're viewing one of these big indexes. And so we have 3 MSEs for this, all of which have now been implemented in Dendrite, because frankly it's a lot quicker to experiment with these things in Dendrite. And in order to ship spaces, we need to port them over to Synapse, and then also implement the peaking into Element and its underlying SDKs. But once that is done, and a bit more polishing, then it will be here. A few other things we need is to figure out how to use spaces for group access. So have every member of the hash moderator space needs to be a moderator in this room, or only people in this space are allowed to join this room or this set of rooms. Originally, this was part of the MSC. I split it out a few weeks ago because the MSC was massive and we wanted to land the original one without getting too het up over the details of this one. The current plan is to make these group accesses effectively macros which expand out and get applied to the particular rooms. And that is done somehow by the servers who have users with appropriate power in that room. So it could be done by the users, it could be done by a bot. We haven't quite decided yet, but that will be coming next. We'll probably ship without it as a first cut and then add it on shortly afterwards. We also need to support Flare, because today communities define how Flare works, the little badges that you get next to your names in Matrix, like the little FOSDEM badges, which people will be seeing on Matrix today. And the idea here is to publish Flare as profiles expressed as rooms, which is another MSC that we actually do have now today working on Dendrite. And then we confirm these Flare claims by cross-referencing them against space membership. It's a little bit sci-fi, but we are hopefully getting there. And once we have those things, we will turn off the old community system, migrate them over to new spaces, and never look back. So finally, let's have a bit of science fiction, because spaces are a little bit sci-fi. When we implemented them, we had a bit of an epiphany that this isn't just a way of grouping together rooms. It's actually an arbitrary decentralized hierarchy. It's basically a file system where your files aren't files on disk, but they're just streams of real-time data. You even have decentralized ACLs, as Florian and the DSN guys at Karlsruhe have been writing about, getting excited about Matrix having a decentralized access control system, and we were thinking, but Matrix is decentralized comms. I mean, the ACLs aren't that interesting, are they? And then realised actually they are very interesting, because if you think of it in this context, we basically have created potentially a global decentralised hierarchical file system, kind of like the World Wide Web URL space, except for real-time data, and it's read-write. So it's a bit like Usenet hierarchies, but without the moderation mess, because you have the decentralized ACLs built in, so you can just distribute access on an ad hoc basis as things want. You can think of it as being a bit like DMOS, if anybody remembers DMOS, as a big hierarchical directory of all the content on the web, now sadly abandoned. Or you could basically see it as a possible evolution of the original web idea, somewhere where it's not just consuming data, but equally publishing and subscribing in real time. So lots of crazy ideas here. If in an ideal world I'd have had time to implement a fuse file system on top of spaces, we could CD into them, and we could touch files which appear as events in chat rooms, or we could tail a inbox in a directory and stream the events as they happen in that particular room in real time. And we could even map POSIX ACLs onto power levels and stuff, and actually use this thing and visualize it as a global AFS on steroids file system for the web. But didn't have time, so instead I wrote a slide about it and got excited. How am I doing on time? Badly. Let me speed up. Next generation projects. Thought people would be interested in some of the other things which we're doing in general in Matrix at the moment. Our Matrix ecosystem today has got three main stacks on the web, React, iOS, and our new Android stack, built on all the latest goodness from the Android world, and Element sits as the flagship clients on top of those. Then in the community, there are an ever-increasing number of cool projects. NeoChat's a new client for KDE using Kirigami that's just appeared quite recently. The others, Quaternion, Fractal, Neko, WeChat, Matrix, Gomux, and many, many others, Mirage on Python, are also going great guns too. And meanwhile, on the client side, on the server side, we have Synapse, of course, and Dendrite as the Go next generation one. What's going on here, though? We have two new projects which we're fairly seriously working on in the core team. One is called Hydrogen, and I'll tell you about it in a minute, but it's basically a next generation web technology SDK and client for Matrix. And the other is Matrix Rust SDK, which, as the name suggests, is written in Rust, and could be seen as a next-generation SDK for native clients. So Hydrogen itself is a progressive web app today. It uses vanilla JS, no React, no Angular or anything. It uses a model view model pattern, I think. Bruno will correct me if I'm wrong. And the views are very lazy and lightweight. And the really unique thing about it is that it really aggressively persists client state transactionally in IndexedDB. So rather than storing any matrix data really in RAM or in heap in JavaScript, the first time it gets anything from the server, it immediately blats it to disk and stores it in the IndexedDB. And as a result, for my client, it uses 100 times less RAM than Element Web, and it is ludicrously fast. It also has complete end-to-end encryption using Ulm and WebAssembly, and it's structured as an SDK architecture, although we haven't split out the SDK yet. So the vision on Hydrogen is that it could well become the next generation of JS SDK, the universal way to build web technology Matrix clients, at least from the Matrix core team. Other people can do their own stuff and do Flutter and Dart and all that sort of thing, but this would be one of the options which we're looking for now. I'll very quickly show you Hydrogen. I have one where I've already logged in, but it's not actually loaded. So this is basically, in fact, I'll hit refresh so you can see, there we go. Click this, and 1, 2, so about 2 seconds for it to go and give me access to my account here. And now it's actually caught up. And now if I go to, say, the Matrix stand, here's the conversation that was going on that we were looking at a minute ago. It's obviously a little bit bare bones at this point, but say switching between the different rooms, going to FOSDEM video or Element Web, FOSDEM itself, or whatever it might happen to be, it's just super, super snappy. And in fact, if it's also got this really fun mode where you can go and build out a tiled user interface, which is really cute. Let me find appropriate rooms to join here. Dendrite Dev, Redux Resistant Tech, and Hydrogen, why not? So there we go. There is Hydrogen being incredibly cute, going and giving you all of these various different rooms in here, and rapidly letting you switch around the things as you might want. So if you're not playing with Hydrogen, it's live on hydrogen.element.io. It also works all the way down to IE11 if you're feeling particularly masochistic and want to support bad old browsers. But that gives you an idea of what Hydrogen is. Right, what else? Rust SDK. It's really coming along now. Powers Fractal as of about a month ago, as well as WeChat Matrix, the Rust version of the WeChat Matrix plugin, written by Demir, who you'll probably know as Polyar, and was his basically main project at the moment. He's also been experimenting with doing Hydrogen-style persistence of state using the SLED key value store rather than IndexedDB, which is the kind of funky idiomatic Rust key value store. It's also very modular. Things like the encryption is completely split out as a separate module in its own right, which is really exciting because we've never had a general purpose submodule for encryption that can be used for other clients. So this is the missing link between libOLM and your Matrix client. That if you're implementing E2E, you should be able to pick this thing up in Rust, and as long as you can link against Rust, it will go and do all the heavy lifting for you, be audited, and not screw it up. So for instance, on Android right now, we're experimenting in wrapping it as Kotlin using Unify and replacing the default Kotlin implementation of E2E in Android with the Rust one for safety and consistency. So there's a chance that Rust SDK can end up being a universal SDK for Matrix clients from the core team. So, another one, quickly, final one, that we've been working on is Cerulean. So Cerulean is a playground for Twitter-style threaded comms on Matrix. This is actually proof of concept that we did to show off our proposal for Matrix to be used for Blue Sky, which is the decentralized communication initiative that Twitter has been pushing for the last year or so. Cerulean's meant to be a proof of concept, deliberately trivial for Matrix newbies to understand. It doesn't have any dependencies at all apart from React. There's 2,000 lines of code, talks straight to Matrix, so no SDK, no Hydrogen and no JS SDK, it's just using fetch. Sits there on GitHub, and you can use it today at Cerulean. Here's one that I didn't prepare, so you can pop over to Cerulean and go and look at my account on it. It's actually backed by Dendrite here. I'm hoping that Dendrite is alive enough to be able to show me my posts. And there's me saying Happy New Year to people. Last time I actually posted something. And you can see here we have threads. And a whole bunch of random people I don't know on Dendrite went and wished me Happy New Year back. And I didn't see it until just now. Sorry, folks. Thank you. Happy New Year to you too. And this is really fun. You've got vertical layout and horizontal layout. And the threading MSC that it implements is one that we can use in Matrix itself more generally than this. And if I were to go and log into the Dendrite home server, we could see that these threads are rooms, and indeed the profiles are also rooms too. We've also done a bunch of stuff with decentralized reputation, so I can subscribe to grey lists of reputation data here and go and fade things in and out. So Travis, for instance, doesn't like me. So if I dislike Travis does like me. But if I dislike his opinions and I dial down his opinions, then it fades everything I say out on this thread. So there I am, having been faded out there, and I can dial it back up, and it's visible again, etc. Or if it was NSFW content, I could do the same thing. I don't think there's anything here tagged as NSFW. It basically provides an ecosystem for people to experiment with filters and publish them and share them as needed, without obviously any absolutes or authoritarian system here. So that's what Cerulean is. Lots of fun. Go read MSC 2836 if you're interested in threading. as I said, every user has a personal timeline, and then users post messages into their timeline, and then you also create a separate room for the thread of messages. Ideally, the messages should be symlinked from the timeline into the thread room, but at the moment we don't have symlinks as an MSC, so we just copy it over. And then replies in the thread room get added, replies get added as symlinks into the same thread. So this allows us to have protected tweet semantics. So if you imagine one of these thread rooms like this, with a kind of set of symlinks in it, you have the you have the hierarchy of the thread between the symlinks linking through to messages on, say, Alice and Bob's timeline rooms. So it's a taste of things to come. Very excitingly, somebody else has also built a system. I don't know whether he wants me to talk about it or not, but it's called hummingbird.com, which is using similar stuff for social networking on top of Matrix, and I think it's got legs. Totally different way of doing it, obviously, to ActivityPub or a centralized system like Twitter, but it goes to show that Matrix is not just for instant messaging. All of this, as you may have noticed, a recurring theme is that we're leaning a lot on Dendrite here. Dendrite is obviously the next-gen Go server. We exited alpha in October of last year. We're now up on version 0.39. We're doing roughly weekly releases, and seriously, give it a go if you haven't already. If you're a Matrix dev, it's definitely worth playing with. It's surprisingly stable, although it did crash just before I recorded this talk, on dendrite.matrix.org. Uses about 3 times less RAM than Synapse, but we also haven't optimized it at all yet. Irritatingly, we are still missing some pretty important features like push notifications and filters and things. But as you've seen, it's actually really fun to hack on, and a lot of our new stuff like spaces, threads, peer-to-peer matrix, new transports, is all happening on Dendrite first, and then backporting more leisurely to Synapse once we've proven it on Dendrite. It's also sparked the development of Complement, which is the new Golang matrix compliant test harness that we've gone and built in Go alongside Dendrite that replaces the Perl test harness side test that we've used historically, although we're going to run the two side by side for the foreseeable. It looks like this. Horizontally scalable everything inside. You can run it as a monolith where all the services are linked together into a single binary. At the moment it's using Kafka as a message bus between the various different services, a bit like we've ended up using Redis on Matrix, on Synapse. However, it's possible that Kafka will get replaced by something simpler like Nats going forward. We're thinking about doing that right now. What's next? Well, we've got lots of polish to do still on the protocol and the implementations, and particularly Element. Frankly, we want people to be migrating from WhatsApp to Matrix rather than some other walled garden. Lots of first-time user experience polish. The plan is to just tight loop on seeing people trip over themselves using Element, and whenever they trip over, we fix whatever they tripped over, and then we repeat forever until they're happy. Lots of work still to be done on end-to-end encryption. We had such a sprint for last FOSDEM to get it turned on by default, and the happy paths are great, but the unhappy paths are still miserable. There's just we have a whole new wave of work that needs to be done there to finish that off. And finally, there's a lot of work happening polishing on VoIP. Lots of this has landed already in the last month or so, but we're coming to the end of basically reworking the one-to-one voice and video calling in Matrix so that it is a much more robust set of foundations than what we've had historically. And beyond that, loads of features still to come. Honestly, they're prioritized behind polishing right now. I won't read through the whole list. It's stuff, some of them we've been talking about for years, some of them are fairly new. I did compare it with the list I had last year, and I'm happy to say that many of the things on that list have actually happened since, so it's not completely aspirational. For instance, voice messaging is happening right now. Threading you've seen progress on. Location sharing is happening for sure very shortly, and presence is also going to happen working well in the near future. And peer-to-peer is really exciting. If you haven't seen Neil Alexander's talk yesterday, go check it out, because we have just got Bluetooth low energy matrix running on peer-to-peer on both iOS and Android, and it is transformative. But I don't have enough time to talk about it or demo it now. So we need help. Tell your friends, don't use Slack or Discord for your chat, please. Use an open server. Ideally one that talks Matrix. Build Bridgerton bots, don't reinvent the wheel. Please follow us and spread the word. And thank you very much for listening. Hopefully there might be time for questions.